They burned his fortune to ash on the very islands his ships made rich. They sank his crown of gold beneath the eastern sea. They butchered the people of the towns he built and reduced his treasure houses to smoking stone. And still, when the wars were over and every dragon of the dance lay dead, it was the old mariner they could not be rid of. He outlived his wife, his daughter, his son, his king, and the king after that. When at last he died, full of years, they laid his body beneath the Iron Throne for a week, then carried him out to sea and gave him to the deep aboard the same ancient ship that had made his name. As she sank, men swear a dragon flew overhead in salute. Born in 53 AC, dead at 79 in 132 AC, the greatest sailor the world has ever known, and the wealthiest man in the Seven Kingdoms, this is the complete story of Corlys Velaryon. But was the sea snake a hero, a monster, or simply a legend the histories could not stop arguing over? Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. Heroes and monsters of Westeros. This is Corlys Velaryon, the man of whom they said no man sailed farther. He was born early in the year 53, after the conquest, on the windswept island of Driftmark, the largest in all of Blackwater Bay. House Velaryon was old when the Targaryens were young, an ancient line of Valyrian blood that had crossed the narrow sea before the Doom and made their home upon the salt and the tide. They were a house of the sea before all else, and into that house, that salt, that restlessness, Corlys was born. From his first breath, the water was calling him. He answered young. At 16, when other lordlings were learning to sit a horse, Corlys was given command of a ship. He sailed the Cod Queen from Driftmark to Dragonstone and back, and the sea did not frighten him. It freed him. He took the helm of other vessels in those early years, the Summer Maid, the Ice Wolf, and by the time he was 23, he was already spoken of across Westeros as a mariner without equal. He was, the histories say, as brilliant as he was restless, and as adventurous as he was ambitious. A man, by every account, seldom satisfied, and so he built a ship to match his hunger. He designed her himself, the swiftest, finest vessel of the age, and he named her the Sea Snake. From that ship, and that ship alone, he took the name the world would remember him by. Not from any coil of cunning, not from any sinful streak, whatever the singers later pretended. The Sea Snake was a ship, and the Sea Snake was her captain, and the two of them were about to go where no Westerosi had ever dared. 9 times he sailed east into the unknown, and the histories call them the 9 Great Voyages. On the first, he passed beyond the Jade Gates at Qarth, sailing on to the fabled lands of Yi Ti and the island of Leng, and he came home with his holds full of silk and spice and jade. That single voyage doubled the wealth of House Velaryon. On the second, he sailed all the way to Asshai-by-the-Shadow, that haunted city at the edge of the world, and there, the stories say, he lost his love and half his crew. Who that love was, the histories never name. It is a wound in the record that no chronicler has ever filled, a grief the Sea Snake carried home and never spoke of. At Asshai, he reported one stranger thing still, a ship sitting in the harbor that he believed to be the Sun Chaser, the vessel of the lost explorer Elisa Farman, who had vanished years before. A ghost in a city of ghosts. On the third voyage, he turned north into colder seas and became the first man of Westeros ever to navigate the 1,000 islands of the Shivering Sea, and to set foot in Nefer of Nagai and Far Mosovi. Of the voyages between, the histories fall silent. We know only that he kept sailing, kept trading, kept pushing the edge of the known map farther east with every year that passed. His ninth and final voyage was the greatest of all. He filled the sea snake's hold with gold at Korth, and with it bought 20 more ships, loading them with spices and silk and elephants for the long voyage home. The sea took its price. Only 14 of those ships ever reached Driftmark, and every last elephant died upon the water. And yet what survived was enough. For one shining stretch of years, the surviving cargo made House Velaryon the wealthiest family in all the 7 kingdoms, richer than the lions of Casterly Rock, richer even than the Hightowers of Oldtown. With that fortune, he reshaped his corner of the world. He raised a new seat called High Tide on a tidal island linked to Driftmark only when the waters fell, and there he set the ancient driftwood throne of his house and stored the treasures of the East. 2 towns swelled up under his lordship: Hull near Old Castle Driftmark, and Spicetown beside High Tide, boomtowns thick with trade, pulling so much commerce across the bay that they began to draw it clean away from King's Landing itself. The sea snake had made his house the equal of any in the realm. Now he reached for something gold alone could not buy. In the year 90 AC, he married a princess of the blood of the dragon. Her name was Rhaenys Targaryen, 16 years old, the only child of Prince Aemon, who was himself the eldest son of the old king Jaehaerys. By the oldest laws of inheritance, Rhaenys stood close to the Iron Throne itself. She rode a dragon, the great red she-dragon Meleys. And when she came to her wedding, she insisted on arriving upon Meleys' back, descending out of the sky to be wed. In one stroke, the sea snake had bound his sea house to the would-be heir of the 7 kingdoms. Remember her name and her claim, for both will shape every grief that follows. 2 children came of that union: a daughter, Lannisters, born late in 92 AC, and a son, Leonor, born in 94 AC. But in the same year his daughter was born, the sea snake learned the first bitter lesson of court. His good father, Prince Aemon, was slain on Tarth, struck down by a crossbow bolt while fighting Myrish raiders, and with him died Rhaenys' place in the line of succession. For old King Jaehaerys passed over Rhaenys, who was a woman and with child besides, and named his second son Balon his heir instead. Corlys, who had sailed his fleet to aid Aemon, took it as an insult to his wife and his blood. He resigned his seat upon the small council in protest and sailed home to Driftmark. It was the first time the sea snake walked away from the throne in anger. It would not be the last. 9 years later, the wound was torn open again. In 101 AC, Prince Balon died, and the succession that had passed over Rhaenys was thrown wide once more. The realm gathered at the great ruin of Harrenhal for what men called the Great Council, to choose between the claimants. And Corlys and Rhaenys came to press the claim of their young son, Leonor, grandson of Jaehaerys' own eldest line. The sea snake's wealth and fame won him real support. The lords of Blackwater Bay, the Baratheons of Storm's End, the Starks of the North with their bannermen, and Blackwood of the Riverlands. It was not enough. The assembled lords chose the male line and named Prince Viserys, the heir over Laenor, by a count the Meisters never dared to publish, though the singers claim it was 20-1. And so, for a second time, the sea snake gave up his admiralty and his council seat and sailed home to Driftmark in fury, Rhaenys at his side, both of them passed over now, twice in a single lifetime. The slights kept coming. A few years on, when Viserys was widowed, a Grand Maester proposed he wed Corlys' young daughter, Lannisters, then but 12. The king chose Alicent Hightower instead. Another door, quietly shut in the sea snake's face. So he turned from the court that scorned him and went to make himself glorious in war. In 106 AC, he made common cause with the most dangerous man in the realm, Prince Daemon Targaryen, against the Triarchy, the alliance of the free cities of Lys and Myr and Tyrosh, for mastery of the Stepstones. Corlys commanded the fleet, Daemon the army, and their great enemy was a cruel Myrish prince called Kragus Drahar, the crab feeder. For years they fought across those broken rocks, and by 109 AC, all but 2 of the islands and the waters around them had fallen to their banners. Daemon set a crown upon his own head and named himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. And it was Corlys Velaryon who placed that crown upon Daemon's brow with his own hands. The kingmaker, raising up a king of war. The triumph did not hold. The Triarchy struck back under a captain named Rakallio Rindun, allied with Dorne, and in the years that followed the conquest unraveled. But the sea snake's name had been carved deeper still. He was now, the histories say, remembered as wise in peace and valiant in war. His house, meanwhile, was binding itself to the dragon ever tighter. In 114 AC, his son, Laenor, wed the Princess Rhaenyra, the king's own heir, and in the years that followed she bore 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, grandsons of the sea snake, through Laenor. His daughter Laena, long promised to Daemon Targaryen, at last became his wife, and gave Daemon twin girls, Baela and Rowena, granddaughters of Corlys by his daughter. The blood of Driftmark and the blood of the dragon were now woven together past all unwinding. The old mariner, scorned at 2 great councils, had made himself grandfather to half the future of House Targaryen. And then, in the space of a single year, his world began to come apart. In the first days of 120 AC, his daughter Laena died, only days after delivering a deformed son who lived but a few hours. Within that same year, his son Laenor was murdered, cut down by a knight of his own household in the streets of Spicetown, the town his father's gold had raised. Both of the sea snake's children dead in a single turning of the seasons. The richest man in the 7 kingdoms could buy anything in the world except the lives of his own son and daughter. That same year, a great fire consumed part of Harrenhal and killed Lord Lionel Strong, the Hand of the King, and his son Sir Harwin Strong. Folk blamed the curse of that accursed castle, or Daemon, or Larys Strong, or the king himself. But the fool Mushroom, who never let a kind explanation stand where a cruel one might serve, pointed his crooked finger at the sea snake. Mushroom claimed that Corlys himself set that fire in revenge, for Harwin Strong had cuckolded his son Laenor, fathering the very boys the realm called Laenor's heirs. No other history will support him. The accusation is Mushroom's alone, and we leave it where he left it. For the paternity of those boys was the great whispered scandal of the age, and it would shape the sea snake's final years. It returned to wound him in 126 AC, when Corlys fell suddenly and gravely ill with a fever, and the question of who would inherit Driftmark after him split his house in 2. With both his children dead, the law gave the seat to Lennor's eldest son. But that boy was already heir to the Iron Throne, and so Rhaenyra urged the dying sea snake to name her second son, Lucerys, his heir instead. His own eldest nephew, Sir Vaemond Velaryon, would have none of it. Vaemond demanded the seat for himself, and declared openly before the court what many had only whispered, that Rhaenyra's 3 sons were no Velaryons at all, but bastards fathered by the late Sir Harwin Strong. For speaking it aloud, Vaemond paid in full. Prince Daemon seized him, and Rhaenyra had his head removed and his body given to her dragon. Daemon's 5 surviving cousins, who had repeated the same rumor, had their tongues cut out by King Viserys and were known ever after as the Silent Five. Mushroom, with his sour wit, observed that lacking tongues with which to make their appeal, they preferred to argue with swords. And the sea snake, his succession settled in blood, rose from his fever and lived. He had buried his children, watched his nephew butchered, and seen his grandsons branded as bastards. And the worst of it had not yet come. For in 129 AC, King Viserys died, and his second wife's faction crowned their own son, Aegon II, breaking the oaths every lord had sworn to Rhaenyra. The dance of the dragons had begun, and the sea snake, old now but unbroken, sailed his ships to Dragonstone and declared for Rhaenyra, the wife of his dead son, the mother of his grandsons. He was the greatest lord in all the realm to pledge himself to her cause. More than half of her host were Velaryon men, and his fleet gave the Blacks total command of the sea, sealing the Gullet and Blackwater Bay against their enemies. On the Black Council, he was a voice of restraint. When Lord Bartimos Celtigar urged them to burn King's Landing to the ground, it was Corlys who refused him, with the simplest of reasons. "We want to rule the city," he said, "not burn it." But the war would take from him the one thing his fortune had never been able to protect. At Rook's Rest, in 129 AC, his wife Rhaenys flew Meleys, the great red she-dragon she had ridden to her wedding half a century before, to relieve a besieged lord. There, in the sky, she was set upon by King Aegon upon Sunfire and his brother Aemon upon monstrous old Vhagar, and she was killed. A charred and ruined body was recovered after, believed to be hers, though the burning was such that no one could ever swear to it for certain. After 50 years of marriage, the sea snake's queen was gone, and he could not even be sure the ashes were hers. And here grief curdled into grievance. For Rhaenyra had forbidden her own sons from flying to Rhaenys' aid, and Corlys, in his sorrow, laid his wife's death at the queen's feet. He would serve her cause still, but a coldness had entered him that never left. He served her well regardless. Mushroom claims that while Rhaenyra was paralyzed by grief over the death of her son Lucerys, the true command of the war passed to Corlys and Rhaenys both, the old mariners steering the realm. And the histories agree that the sea snake was named Hand of the Queen, though they credit the appointment not to Rhaenyra herself, but to her son, Prince Jacaerys. But the sea that had made him would now unmake everything he had built. At the Battle of the Gullet, one of the bloodiest sea fights in all of history, the Triarchy shattered the Velaryon blockade, and Prince Jacaerys was killed in the fighting. A squadron of enemy ships slipped past Dragonstone and fell upon Driftmark itself. They burned Spicetown to the waterline with fire ships and put its people to the sword. They burned High Tide, and with it, the eastern treasures of a lifetime, the silk and the spice and the jade of 9 great voyages, the fortune that had made the Velaryons the richest house in the world. Myrish and Tyroshi soldiers reduced it all to ash. Everything the sea snake had sailed to the ends of the earth to win, gone in a night of fire. When Rhaenyra at last took King's Landing in 130 AC, his ships sealed Blackwater Bay behind her. He had given her everything, and she would repay it with a black cell. For the queen had grown suspicious and afraid, and her suspicion fell upon 2 dragon riders sprung from the small folk, Adam Velaryon, whom Corlys had named his heir, and a girl called Nettles. When the queen sent a knight to arrest Adam at the dragon pit, the sea snake secretly sent word ahead, and Adam escaped into the sky on the dragon's sea smoke. Hauled before the queen's man, and accused of treachery, Corlys did not deny it. He was bound and beaten, and dragged down into the dungeons of the Red Keep, and thrown into a black cell to await his trial and his death. The consequence was swift and ruinous for Rhaenyra. With the sea snake in chains, his men, who made up half her strength in the capital, abandoned her by the hundreds. 2 of his own sworn swords tried to cut their way in to free him, and were betrayed and hanged for it. And still he sat in the dark, the wealthiest man in the world, in a cell beneath the throne he had bled to win. That paternity dispute, the great quarrel of the histories, hangs over this final chapter too. For who were Adam and his brother Allen of Hull, the boys Corlys raised up and made his heirs? Their mother, Merilda of Hull, claimed they were sons of his dead son Leonor, which would make them his grandsons. Grand Maester Monkun and the Septon Eustace both side with her. But Mushroom dissents, as ever, claiming the sea snake had fathered the boys himself, hidden them away while his wife Rhaenys lived, and only acknowledged them once she was dead. Sons or grandsons, the histories will not agree, and the sea snake took the truth of it to the bottom of the sea. What is certain is how the war ended, and the sea snake ended it. Released from his black cell, by which means even the histories dispute, some saying he was freed by the men of Sir Perkin the Flea when they stormed the keep, others that Aegon's men loosed him only later, he was offered a full pardon to turn his cloak to King Aegon II. And the old mariner made his own terms, a pardon for every man who had fought for Rhaenyra, the release of his granddaughter, Baela, and that Rhaenyra's youngest son, the boy who would one day be Aegon III, be wed to Aegon's daughter, and named joint heir, so that both warring lines might share the throne. They were the terms of a man trying, even now, to save what could be saved. And when King Aegon demanded that boy be gelded or sent to the wall, and Tywin Lannister argued for his outright death, it was the sea snake who rose in horror, and named them all fools and liars and oath-breakers, and stormed from the hall. In the end, he counseled the embittered king to lay down his crown and take the black. The king refused and was poisoned soon after, and the war was over. But the sea snake's trials were not. When Aegon III was crowned, and the great northern lord Cregan Stark seized the court in what men called the Hour of the Wolf, he arrested 22 men suspected of poisoning the dead king, and the sea snake was among them. An old man dragged once more toward a headsman. He was spared by the edict of the young King Aegon III himself, an edict his granddaughters Baela and Rhaena begged the boy king to issue. The girls he had fought for saved the grandfather who had fought for them. And so the sea snake came at last to harbor. In the final years of his long life, he served as one of the regents who ruled the realm in the name of the boy king Aegon III. He had outlived the war, outlived his enemies, outlived nearly everyone he had ever loved. On the 6th day of the 3rd moon of 132 AC, Corlys Velaryon died of old age, at 79 years. They laid his body beneath the Iron Throne for a week, the place his blood had reached for and never grasped. Then Merilda of Hull and her son Allen carried his remains home, and east of Dragonstone they gave him to the sea aboard his own ancient ship, the Sea Snake herself. As the old vessel filled and sank beneath the waves, carrying the greatest mariner the world had ever known down into the deep he had spent his life crossing, men swear a dragon flew overhead, the wild beast they called the cannibal. Dark wings spread against the sky, as if the world itself had come to bid the sea snake farewell. His lordship passed to his legitimized grandson, Allen Velaryon, who men would call Oakenfist, and who would carry the Velaryon banner to glory upon the very seas his grandfather had opened. Alan wed the sea snake's granddaughter, Baela, and when their first child proved a daughter, they named her Lannisters, for the daughter Corlys had lost. He had hoped, they say, for a son, to name him Corlys. The name would come to the family in time, carried down the generations like a tide that never fully ebbs. So was the sea snake a hero, a monster, or a legend? The histories cannot quite decide, and perhaps that is the only honest answer. He was a proud man, intractable even in old age, who walked away from the throne twice in fury, who crowned a king of war with his own hands, who may, if Mushroom is to be believed, have burned a castle and hidden his bastards and steered a whole war from the shadows. But he was also the man who refused to burn an innocent city, who saved 2 dragon riders from a frightened queen's cruelty, who called kings oathbreakers to their faces, who fought to the last to bind a broken realm back together. He lost his love at the edge of the world, his children in a single year, his wife to dragon fire, his fortune to flame, and still he would not break. The wealthiest man in the world, who died with his treasures burned and his house diminished, and was given back to the sea with a dragon for his honor guard. No man, the histories agree, ever sailed farther, and no man, perhaps, ever lost more along the way. From first breath to last, that was Corlys Velaryon,